The wind carried a dry, whistling song across the open plains, and the sun had barely crested the horizon when Elias Hawthorne drove the rusty old pickup down the winding dirt road that led to the ranch he had bought for $1. $1. Could still remember the incredulous laughter from the bank teller when he signed the papers, and the smirk of the townfolk when he mentioned he planned to live there. The ranch had been abandoned for decades, left to the mercy of time, storms, and the slow creep of wild grass. Most people in the county called it cursed, but Elias had never been one to heed whispers or the wary eyes of neighbors. There was a stubbornness in him that ran like fire through his veins, a determination to make something of the forgotten, and he liked a challenge. As he crested the last hill, the old homestead came into view. The roof sagged like the back of a weary mule, shingles missing in jagged patches. The paint, whatever had once adorned the house, had peeled away to reveal the bare, weathered wood beneath, gray as the stones lining the nearby creek. Broken shutters swung lazily in the morning wind, and the barn stood like a silent sentinel, its doors hanging off their hinges. The air smelled of dry earth and old timber, and somewhere far off, a hawk cried out, circling the open sky. Elias parked the pickup and stepped down onto the hard-packed dirt. He ran a hand along the fence post, splintered and cracked, and marveled at how alive the land felt despite its long abandonment. There was a quiet strength here, a stubborn life refusing to surrender to neglect. He could feel it beneath his boots, like the pulse of the place itself. This was the kind of land that could make a man either rich in spirit or broken body, and Elias was ready to test his mettle. The first thing he noticed beyond the decay was the garden, or rather, what was left of it. Weeds clawed their way through the dry soil, but amidst them he saw stubborn traces of cultivation. Squash leaves twisted toward the sun, and a row of corn stalks stood stubbornly upright, their tips yellowing but defiant. Someone had been here not too long ago. Elias's curiosity tightened in his chest. Who would dare tend to a place like this without a roof overhead, without a community for miles? He pushed open the creaking gate and approached the barn. Its doors protested with a groan that echoed across the empty plains. Dust swirled in the early morning light as he stepped inside. The smell of old hay was sharp in his nose. But it was under that aroma that he detected something else, a faint, sweet scent, like wildflowers mixed with earth. Elias froze, listening. There was movement. "Hello?" His voice sounded odd in the vast emptiness, rough against the wooden walls. He waited, but the only response was the scuffing of hooves. Was it footsteps? His heart started to beat faster. He wasn't alone. Then he saw her. She emerged from the shadows near the far corner of the barn, and for a moment, Elias could hardly believe his eyes. She was young, her hair the color of autumn wheat, tangled from living outside, but glowing in the morning sun. Eyes were sharp, intelligent, wary, and they studied him as though he were some strange creature intruding upon her world. She held herself with a grace that seemed born of survival rather than society, and there was a fire in her gaze that made Elias feel both invited and warned at the same time. "Who are you?" he asked, stepping carefully forward, not wanting to startle her. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, her eyes narrowing just slightly, assessing him. Then finally she said, "I live here." Elias stopped in his tracks. The words hung in the air, strange and impossible in their simplicity. "You live here?" "Yes," she replied, her voice steady, but with a hardness that suggested she had learned to be cautious. "No one else comes. Not often, least of all strangers." He swallowed, trying to steady his voice. I just bought this ranch." He held up the crumpled deed, though she didn't seem impressed. $1. She lifted an eyebrow as if the sum was laughable, and yet her eyes betrayed the flicker of curiosity. $1, huh? That's a lot for a man to pay, and nothing at all to get. Elias laughed softly, a dry, nervous sound. "You could say that, like a challenge." Her lips twitched into what might have been the beginning of a smile, though it disappeared almost instantly. "A challenge," she echoed. Then her gaze drifted toward the broken windows, the sagging roof, and the overgrown land surrounding them. "Wait. You might find this place more than you bargained for." He felt a thrill of excitement and apprehension in equal measure. There was a story here. He could feel it in the beams and the dust and the air itself. But the mystery of the girl living inside this abandoned place, was the strongest pull of all. Who was she? How had she ended up here alone? And why had no one in the town spoken of her, of the life that persisted behind these crumbling walls? He took a careful step forward, and she mirrored his movement, holding her ground. Neither spoke for a moment. The wind rattled the rafters, and the sound made Elias acutely aware of how isolated he was. For a place that had seemed dead from the outside, it was alive with stories, secrets, and somehow, this girl. "My name is Elias," he said finally, extending a hand. "I don't mean to intrude, but I want to. Make this place mine. Maybe we can help each other." Her gaze softened, just a fraction, as if weighing the truth of his words. "I'm Lenora," she said. "You'll find out soon enough that this land doesn't bend to anyone's will. You have to earn its trust. Sometimes it tests the people who live here." Elias felt the weight of her words. He had thought he was buying land, an empty ranch, a place to call his own. But now he realized he had stumbled into a world that had its own rules, its own guardians, and its own hidden stories. The dollar he had paid seemed almost irrelevant compared to the cost of understanding this place. "Show me," he said quietly. "What I'm getting into?" Lenora didn't answer, just turned, her silhouette framed by the slanting morning light, and led him toward the main house. The door creaked open, and inside, the shadows seemed alive, whispering secrets of lives long past, of storms weathered and winter nights survived. He could see signs of habitation, a blanket folded on the floor, a small fire pit with cold ashes, dishes neatly stacked on a wooden shelf. She had made a life here, hidden and self-sufficient, and yet there was more, something untold, waiting just out of reach. Elias's pulse quickened. He wanted to explore, to uncover, to understand. But there was also a caution in the way Lenora moved, a protective instinct that warned him that the ranch hand, the girl who called it home, was not to be taken lightly. As he followed her up the creaking stairs, his eyes scanned the dimly lit rooms, imagining the stories each corner might tell. He felt the thrill of discovery and the tension of uncertainty. This ranch, bought for $1, had become a labyrinth of mystery, and at the center of it all was Leonard, untamed, and entirely her own. And then, as they reached the top of the stairs, the floor beneath them groaned ominously. Elias froze, heart hammering, and Lenora stopped beside him, placing a hand gently on his arm. "You should know," she said quietly, eyes darkening with something between warning and promise. "There are things here that no one in town remembers, and some that they'd rather forget. Not everything in this place wants to be found." Elias swallowed, the weight of the unknown settling around him. He'd bought a ranch for $1, but what he had found was a life he hadn't anticipated. A story that was far from over, and a girl who held secrets that might change everything. He took a breath, bracing himself, and stepped forward into the shadows of the old house. And in that moment, he realized he was no longer just a buyer. He was a participant in a story that had been waiting decades to unfold, and the first chapter had only just begun. "Absolutely. Here's a continuation of your story, keeping the suspense high, deepening character backstory, and expanding the mystery. I've maintained a human-centric, old American style with strong names and simple, natural wording." Elias followed Lenora through the narrow hallway, floorboards groaning beneath their weight like old bones protesting their presence. Each room they passed carried the scent of time, wood smoke lingering in cracks, the faint temps of earth brought in from the fields, and that same hint of wildflowers he had noticed in the barn. The house seemed alive, as though it remembered the lives it had sheltered, whispering fragments of long-forgotten stories to anyone patient enough to listen. Lenora stopped before a door at the end of the hallway. It was smaller than the others. The paint flaked away in uneven patches, and the latch was bent. She pushed it open with care, revealing a modest room, sparsely furnished but tidy. A cot sat against the wall, covered with a patchwork quilt that looked worn but well-loved. Shelves lined the corners, holding books, jars of herbs, and a few carved wooden figures. The sunlight from the window fell across the floor, illuminating dust motes that floated like tiny specters in the air. "This is where I sleep," Lenora said quietly, almost as if speaking too loudly might summon unseen eyes. Her tone carried a weight, a history she wasn't ready to share yet. "It's simple, nothing fancy. It's enough. Elias stepped inside, taking in the room. There was a sense of order here, a method to the solitude, but also a hidden toughness. He could see that Lenora had learned to survive on her own, to make do with what little the world had left her. There was pride in her independence, but also a shadow, a careful wariness that suggested past hurts. "I didn't mean to intrude," Elias said, his voice softer now. I wasn't expecting anyone to be living here. I thought it would be empty." Lenora shook her head slowly. "Most people don't expect anything here. That's why they left. That's why the town let this place decay." Her eyes softened for a moment as she studied him. "I've been here a long time, longer than I can count. I don't usually talk to outsiders, but something about you made me think you might understand. Or at least try to." Elias felt a strange pull at her words. He had always been drawn to the stubborn, the forgotten, the overlooked. It was part of why he had bought the ranch in the first place. But there was something else about Lenora, a quiet intensity that unsettled him and intrigued him at the same time. He wanted to know her story, to know what had led her to claim this abandoned place as her own. "How long have you been here?" he asked, stepping closer to the window and looking out over the overgrown fields. The sun was climbing higher now, casting golden light across the tall grass. "Too long," she replied. Her eyes followed his gaze. "I was young when I came. I lost everything: family, home, people I thought I could trust. This place, it saved me. It gave me space to breathe, to learn, to survive." Elias nodded, feeling a shiver run through him. He could imagine the loneliness, the isolation. The plains stretched endlessly, and to be alone in them for years would shape a person, harden them, and teach them secrets that no one else could understand. "I can't imagine it must have been easy." Lenora's gaze shifted toward the floor. "Easy? No, but it was necessary. Life. Life can demand things you aren't ready for. You learn to endure, to listen, to see things most people overlook." Her voice grew quieter, almost a whisper. "Sometimes it's the things people don't notice that matter the most." Elias studied her face, noting the lines of determination, the fierce light in her eyes, and the hint of vulnerability she tried to hide. He realized that this girl, this survivor, was as much a part of the ranch as the walls and the earth itself. She had grown here, shaped by the land and its silence, and now she was guarding it like a sentinel. The sound of the wind through the broken windows reminded him of the vastness surrounding them. Beyond the house, the plains stretched endlessly, dotted with the occasional gnarled tree, wildflowers, and tall grasses that whispered in the morning breeze. He could see why someone might seek refuge here. The world could be cruel, but the ranch offered solitude, a place where one could disappear and still live. "Why didn't anyone in town tell me about you?" he asked, a hint of curiosity and disbelief in his voice. If people knew someone was living here, surely someone would have mentioned it. Lenora's eyes darkened slightly. "People in town like to pretend this place doesn't exist. Maybe they're afraid of it. Sometimes fear is easier than curiosity. And as for me, I never wanted anyone looking in, not until now." She paused, her gaze steady on his. "Now that you're here, things are different. But you should know this ranch. It doesn't give itself easily. Test the people who try to claim it. Yeah. And it has its ways of making sure they are ready." Elias felt the weight of her words settle around him. This wasn't just land he had bought for $1. It was a living thing with secrets, with hidden dangers, and with a girl who had become its guardian. The simplicity he had imagined building a life, tending the fields, fixing the house, was gone. In its place was a challenge he had not anticipated, one that tested patience, courage, and the ability to see beyond appearances. The table opened it, revealing its contents: small trinkets, scraps of paper, and a few carefully folded letters. As she looked at Elias, her expression unreadable. "These are reminders. Things I've kept to remember where I came from." Lenora moved toward the cot and picked up a small wooden box worn smooth from years of handling. She set it on in "What I've survived." Sometimes the past has a way of finding you, even when you think you've left it behind. Elias leaned closer, studying the items. There were faded photographs, sketches of the ranch as it had once been, and notes with strange symbols and cryptic words. He could feel a story in each piece. Threads of a life woven into the walls, the earth, and the very air of the place. "You've lived a full life here," he said quietly, almost reverently, "even if the world forgot about it." Lenara nodded, setting the box down with care. Yes. In this life, it's all I have. That's why I don't let anyone in lightly. You'll have to earn your place here if you want to stay. Elias felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The ranch, the girl, and the mysteries that clung to every corner of the land were a test he hadn't anticipated. But he couldn't turn back. There was a pull here, something raw and real that demanded he see it through. The dollar he had spent seemed meaningless compared to the life he was stepping into, a life filled with secrets, challenges, and the unspoken promise of discovery. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying a scent of rain and distant wildflowers. Somewhere a fox yipped, and the cry of a hawk pierced the sky. The ranch seemed to breathe, alive with the past, the present, and the possibilities of what might come next. Elias felt a shiver run down his spine, a mixture of fear and anticipation. Lenora turned to him, her eyes sharp and unwavering. There are things here that no one in town remembers, things that move in the shadows, things that wait for the right moment. You'll see soon enough, and when you do, you'll understand why this place isn't just land, why it isn't just a ranch. Elias nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had come seeking a challenge, a place to make his own, and perhaps a story worth living. But what he had found was more than he had bargained for, a girl who had claimed her place against the world. A ranch that held secrets older than any living soul, and a tension that hummed in the very air. He followed her silently as she moved toward the stairs leading to the attic, a space cloaked in shadow. The floorboards above creaked like whispers in the dark, hinting at stories kept just out of reach. Elias's heart pounded with anticipation, knowing that every step forward would reveal more mysteries, more challenges, and perhaps more truths than he could yet imagine. As Lenora reached the attic door, she paused and looked back at him, her expression both warning and invitation. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. Elias took a deep breath, feeling the wind on his face, the weight of the land beneath his boots, and the pull of the story that had only just begun. "I'm ready," he said, though the truth was, he had no idea what waited for him beyond that door. The attic loomed above them, dark and silent, a place where the ranch's oldest secrets seemed to gather like dust in the corners. Elias knew that crossing that threshold would change everything, but he also knew he could not turn back. Not now. Not after finding Lenora. Not after feeling the life that pulsed through this abandoned place. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors, the ranch seemed to hold its breath, waiting to reveal the next chapter to the man who had bought it for a single dollar. Elias lingered in the shadowed hallway as Lenora disappeared up the stairs, toward the attic, the floorboards creaking under her careful steps. He could feel the weight of the house pressing in around him as if it were watching, waiting to judge whether he belonged. He took a moment to steady himself, brushing a hand against the wall, feeling the rough grain of the old wood beneath his fingers. Every scratch, every dent, every faded mark told a story, some happy, some tragic, all forgotten by the outside world. He turned toward the kitchen, hoping to make sense of the strange energy of the place. The room was small, with a cracked sink and a stove blackened by years of use. On the counter, a tin cup and a chipped plate suggested recent activity. Elias realized just how long it had been since he had touched the practicalities of living, fixing a meal, tending a fire, fetching water. Yet for all its wear, there was a kind of order here, a method that made the chaos of the outside world seem far away. He ran a hand over the counter, tracing the scratches and grooves, and his mind wandered to Lenora. How had she survived alone for so long? Who had she lost to come here? The thought made his chest tighten. There was a strength in her that was almost frightening, and yet also magnetic. The way she had claimed the ranch made it her own. Elias felt a pang of both admiration and unease. A sudden sound made him start. Somewhere outside, a branch snapped, sharp against the quiet morning. He froze, listening. For a moment, it could have been anything, a deer, a fox, but there was a weight in the sound, a sense that someone or something was moving deliberately. He moved to the window and peered through the cracked panes. The field stretched into the distance, shimmering with golden grasses, yet he couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from the edges of the trees. He stepped back, heart racing, and decided to follow Lenora upstairs. Each step toward the attic was a step into uncertainty, but he felt compelled to see what she wanted him to understand. When he reached the top, Lenora was standing near a small window, sunlight catching her hair like spun gold. She turned as he entered, her eyes sharp and unreadable. "This room," she said, sweeping her hand toward the corners and shelves, "holds things that aren't always meant to be seen. Things people thought were gone. I've kept them here to understand them, to keep them from being forgotten." Elias felt the chill of curiosity. His gaze followed her gestures to an old trunk tucked in the corner. The leather was cracked, its lock rusted but intact. She knelt before it, brushing the dust from the surface, and looked up at him. "Some things in this place, they aren't just objects. They carry memory, and some of those memories can change the way you see the world." Elias nodded slowly. "I've felt it since I first came here. This ranch, it has a pulse. Like it's alive." Lenora's eyes softened just slightly. "Yes. But not everything alive here is friendly. Not everyone who walked these halls left with goodwill. You have to be careful, some things. They don't forgive easily." She opened the trunk, revealing folded papers, journals with pages yellowed by time, a small, intricately carved wooden box. Elias moved closer, drawn in despite the caution that tingled at the back of his neck. Lenora lifted one of the journals, flipping through it quickly. Her expression darkened. "This belonged to my predecessor," she said, her voice low. "He was a man who thought he could control the land. He underestimated it. Underestimated what he didn't understand. This is his story, and mine is shaped by the echoes of it." Elias glanced at the pages. Seeing entries about the ranch, its strange occurrences, and references to visitors who never stayed long. The writing was neat, but carried a tension, a fear that seemed almost palpable even after decades. "Visitors?" he asked, curious. "People came here before?" Lenora nodded, closing the journal gently. "A few. Some stayed for a night, some for weeks. But none of them understood, and none of them lasted. The ranch. It has ways of revealing truths you might not be ready to face." Elias's mind raced. He had thought the challenge of living here would be physical, repairing the house, tending the land, but it seemed the true test was far deeper. The ranch demanded understanding, intuition, a connection to its hidden life. And it was clear Lenora had learned those lessons the hard way. A sudden knock on the door made them both jump. Elias turned, heart thundering, and saw no one. Lenora moved to the window, peering outside. "No one's there," she said, but her voice carried a note of unease. "Sometimes, it isn't the people you see who matter." Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" Lenora didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to the trunk again, pulling out the small wooden box. She opened it carefully, revealing a collection of keys, trinkets, and small folded maps. "This ranch has layers," she said quietly. "Hidden places, old cellars, tunnels, and rooms that have been sealed for years. Some are safe, some less so. The maps can guide you, but only if you're ready to follow them." Elias leaned closer, examining the maps. Lines marked corridors beneath the house, symbols indicating rooms and storage areas he hadn't seen. His pulse quickened. There was more to this ranch than he had imagined. Hidden depths, secrets buried under decades of dust and silence. "And you've explored all of it?" he asked. Lenora hesitated. "Most of it. But there are parts I've never dared enter alone. Some places, they test the courage of anyone who steps inside. You'll see soon enough why I've waited this long to bring someone else here." The attic seemed to grow colder, the shadows longer. Elias felt a shiver run down his spine. This was no longer just a ranch, no longer just a challenge of labor and endurance. It was a test of judgment, intuition, and resolve. And the girl who had survived here alone was both a guide and a guardian. "Why show me this now?" he asked. Lenora's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "Because I think you need to see the truth. Not all of it, but enough to understand that this land, it has memory, it has will, and it has ways of revealing things only when the time is right. You've bought the ranch for $1, yes, but the price of understanding it is much higher, and that's the test. Are you ready to pay it?" Elias swallowed, feeling the weight of the question. He had come here seeking a fresh start, perhaps a story worth living. But he realized now that the story had already been written in part by the land. By Lenora, by those who had walked these halls before. The challenge was not just to claim the ranch, but to navigate its secrets, to survive its hidden trials, and to prove that he could belong. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows through the attic window. Dust motes danced in the golden light, moving like restless spirits. Elias felt the pull of curiosity and caution in equal measure. Each shadow seemed alive, each creaking floorboard a warning, each whispered draft of wind a message he could not yet interpret. "We should begin," Lenara said at last, closing the trunk and lifting the box of maps. She moved toward the stairs, motioning for Elias to follow. "There are places you'll need to see, to understand, and you'll need to be careful. Not everything in this place is meant for eyes that aren't ready." Elias followed, heart hammering with anticipation. Outside, the wind carried the cries of birds and the rustle of the fields. It was a ranch alive with history, mystery, and challenge. And at its center was a girl who had learned to survive against the odds, and a man who was only beginning to understand the depth of the land he now called his own. As they descended the attic stairs, Elias felt the ranch shift around him, as if acknowledging his presence, testing his resolve, whispering of dangers and secrets that had waited decades for someone brave enough to uncover them. He knew the conflicts ahead would not be easy, the struggle against the land, the shadows of its past, and the tension that lived between him and Lenora, but he also knew he could not turn back. And somewhere, deep within the walls of the house, in hidden corridors and sealed rooms, secrets waited. Secrets that would challenge everything Elias thought he knew about survival. Trust, and the quiet strength that comes from living in a place that refuses to be forgotten. Elias followed Lenora out of the attic and down the narrow staircase, each step echoing in the empty house like a warning. The afternoon sun had shifted, and the shadows in the rooms grew long and sharp. The ranch felt alive around them, every creak and whisper magnified in the silence. Elias's heart hammered as he realized he was stepping deeper into a world that had existed untouched for decades. A world that had shaped Lenora and now demanded he prove himself worthy. They moved toward a section of the house Elias had barely noticed before. The wall here looked ordinary, but Lenora pressed her hand against a small, carved symbol in the wood. A faint click sounded, and the panel swung open to reveal a narrow corridor, dark and musty. The air smelled of earth and old wood, and Elias could see the faint outlines of dust motes dancing in the dim light. "This leads to the cellar," Lenora said, her voice low. "Some of the ranch's oldest secrets are down there. Rooms that haven't been touched in years. Things people thought were gone. And some things you have to be ready for." Elias swallowed, the mixture of excitement and fear coiling in his chest. "What kind of things?" Lenora didn't answer. Instead, she lit a small lantern and motioned for him to follow. The flickering light cast their shadows along the walls, making them stretch and twist like ghosts. Elias felt the pulse of the ranch beneath his feet, a rhythm of history, mystery, and danger. Every step seemed heavier than the last, as though the house itself were testing his resolve. The corridor ended at a heavy wooden door, scarred and darkened by age. Lenora pushed it open slowly, revealing a steep stairway descending into darkness. The air grew colder, damp, and filled with the scent of soil and stone. Elias gripped the lantern tighter, feeling the weight of what lay below. "This is where the past waits," Lenora said, stepping carefully down the stairs. "Sometimes the past isn't kind." Elias followed, each step a test of courage. The stairs ended at a small cellar, cramped but filled with shelves and old trunks. The walls were lined with jars, bottles, and boxes covered in dust. Some contained seeds, some herbs, and others. Elias wasn't sure. Symbols were etched into a few of the containers, strange shapes that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Lenora moved to a trunk in the corner, her hands steady, despite the weight of the years it had held. She opened it, revealing a collection of journals, letters, and faded photographs. "These belong to the men and women who lived here before me," she said. "Some were good people, some made mistakes that cost them dearly. Their stories are here, hidden from the world, waiting for someone brave enough to understand." Elias leaned closer, picking up a photograph. It showed a man standing in the fields, strong and proud, yet there was a sadness in his eyes that seemed to reach across decades. He traced the outline of the man's face, feeling an inexplicable connection. It's like the ranch remembers them, he said softly. Lenora nodded. It does. Every footstep, every choice, every moment. It's all recorded in the land. And some moments, they aren't meant to be forgotten. She paused, her eyes meeting his. That's why I stayed. That's why I learned its ways. And that's why you need to understand it too, if you're going to belong here. A sudden noise echoed from the far corner of the cellar. Elias jumped, lantern swinging. A crate had shifted, toppling slightly, and a faint scuttling sound followed. He squinted into the shadows, heart hammering. What was that? Lenora's expression remained calm, though her eyes sharpened. Rats, probably, she said, but the hesitation in her voice suggested she wasn't entirely certain. Or something else. Sometimes, the house moves on its own, revealing things you weren't expecting. Elias swallowed hard. The cellar, with its shadows and secrets, felt alive in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Every corner seemed to hold a story, every object a memory. And in the center of it all was Lenora, guiding him, testing him, revealing just enough to make him understand the stakes without giving away the full truth. He moved to a shelf of jars, examining the faded labels. Some contained dried herbs, others strange powders. One jar was cracked, its contents spilling slightly onto the floor. Elias bent to inspect it and froze. Tiny symbols had been etched into the floorboards beneath the jar, almost invisible unless you looked closely. His pulse quickened. These were deliberate markings, left to communicate something or warn intruders. Lenora saw his expression and nodded. Ack! The ranch has its own language, its own warnings. Guy, you have to learn to read it, or you could make a mistake that's impossible to undo. Elias felt the weight of her words. He had thought the challenge here was labor, tending fields, fixing a house, but it was far more complex. The ranch demanded awareness, intuition, respect, and courage. And it was clear that Lenora had mastered that language, while he was only beginning to understand its nuances. As he carefully stepped around the markings, he noticed another trunk partially hidden behind a stack of crates. The lock had been broken long ago. He opened it and found dozens of letters, each folded and yellowed with age. They were addressed to someone he did not recognize, full of warnings, confessions, and fragments of lives cut short. Some mentioned the land directly, others spoke of strange happenings, of shadows moving in the corners, of voices heard where none should exist. Elias felt a chill run through him. The ranch was more than a home, it was a living archive of human experience, of mistakes, courage, loss, and survival. And he had stepped directly into its center. Lenora placed a hand on his shoulder. You feel it, don't you? She asked quietly. The weight of the past, the tension in the air, it's alive, Elias. The ranch watches, it tests, it waits. And now that you're here, it's your turn to face it. He nodded, the intensity of the moment pressing down on him. I feel it, he admitted. I didn't expect any of this.
Not the feller.
Not the journals, not all of it. Lenora's gaze softened, but the tension didn't leave her eyes. Most don't, she said, and that's why so many fail. They come for the land, for the buildings, for what they think they can take, and they don't see the cost. The ranch doesn't just test your hands, it tests your heart, your mind, your resolve. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows above, carrying with it the scent of rain and the distant sound of a creek rushing from the hills. The cellar seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper, and Elias felt a thrill of anticipation and fear. Every secret uncovered seemed to multiply the mysteries still hidden. He glanced at Lenora, realizing how much she had endured here, how much she had fought to survive alone, to master a land that could swallow the unprepared. She was strong, resourceful, and wise, but even she acknowledged there were dangers she had not fully confronted. We should go further, Lenora said at last, lifting a lantern from the floor. There's a section of the ranch I've never fully explored alone. Tunnels beneath the east field. Rooms sealed for decades. They hold answers and challenges. You'll see soon enough what I mean. Elias's stomach tightened. Every instinct told him to proceed carefully, yet curiosity and determination pushed him forward. This was the point of no return, the moment where the past, the the present and the future of the ranch converged. They emerged from the cellar into the fading light of late afternoon. Beyond the house, the plains stretched endlessly, gold and green under the heavy sky. Elias could feel the energy of the land, the tension in the air, the weight of all that had happened and all that was yet to come. Every step toward the east field carried anticipation, every rustle in the grass a whisper of secrets waiting to be revealed. Lenora led the way to a small patch of disturbed earth near the edge of the field. She knelt, brushing away the soil to reveal a trapdoor, aged and weathered, almost blending into the surrounding grass. "This is it," she said softly. "Beneath this door lies the heart of the ranch's mysteries. Are you ready for what you might find?" Elias swallowed, the lantern trembling slightly in his hand. He could hear his pulse in his ears, feel the wind tugging at his jacket, see the shadows lengthening across the field. The ranch had led him here, guided him, tested him, and now it demanded the ultimate step. "I'm ready," he said, though his voice carried a mix of fear and determination. He could sense that whatever lay beneath that door would define everything the ranch, Lenora, and his own place in this land. Lenora gave him a sharp look, the kind that spoke of both caution and trust. "Then we go together. Whatever is down there, we face it as a team." Together, they lifted the trapdoor, revealing a steep ladder descending into darkness. The wind whipped through the field around them, carrying a chill that seemed to seep into their bones. The ranch waited silently, holding its breath, holding its secrets, ready to challenge them in ways neither could yet imagine. Elias took a deep breath, gripping the ladder. The moment had come. The climax of discovery, tension, and fear was just below. The ranch had led them to the edge of revelation, and every instinct screamed that what awaited would test the limits of courage, trust, and endurance. As they began their descent, the shadows of the east field stretched long and wild behind them. The air was thick with anticipation. Every sound, every movement seemed amplified, the whisper of wind through the grass, the distant cry of a hawk, the faint creak of the ladder beneath their weight. Elias could feel that the ranch was alive, watching, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. And in that moment, as the darkness swallowed them, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Elias's boots thudded against the wooden rungs of the ladder as he descended into the darkness, the lantern casting a narrow cone of light that flickered across the stone walls. Lenora followed just behind him, steady and determined, her hand brushing the cool wood beside him. The air grew damp and earthy, carrying a scent of soil and something older, almost forgotten. The ladder ended in a small underground chamber, its walls lined with stone and dust, but also with relics of the ranch's history, old tools, forgotten furniture, and stacks of journals and maps. Elias lowered himself carefully and looked around. The room felt alive with stories, the weight of decades pressing down on him. "It's incredible," he whispered, his voice echoing softly. "All this, hidden beneath the surface." Lenora stepped forward, her eyes scanning the shelves. "The ranch holds its secrets for a reason," she said quietly. "Some are warnings, some are lessons, and some are meant to be understood only by those who are willing to see beyond the surface." She moved to a trunk in the corner and opened it, revealing dozens of letters, each carefully folded and tied with string. "These belong to the people who came before us. They left messages for anyone brave enough to find them." Elias picked up a letter, unfolding the brittle paper. The handwriting was careful, almost formal, yet there was a tension in every word, a sense of urgency and fear. The author spoke of storms that seemed to arrive without warning, of crops that failed despite care, and of strange sounds in the fields at night. Elias's pulse quickened as he realized the ranch had tested everyone who had lived here. It demanded more than work, it demanded understanding, patience, courage. "Do you think it tests people on purpose?" he asked, looking at Lenora. She nodded slowly. "Yes, not in a human sense, but in its own way. The ranch wants those who will respect it, who will work with it, who will see its value beyond the dirt and the walls. It won't tolerate those who take without understanding. That's why I survived here alone for so long." Elias felt a deep respect for her, for everything she had endured. He realized that he had thought his challenge would be physical, the labor of the ranch, but the real test had been learning to see the life within it, to respect it, and to earn a place in it alongside Lenora. They spent hours exploring the underground chamber, uncovering hidden rooms, examining journals, and piecing together the history of the ranch. Elias learned of the storms that had battered the land, the families that had tried and failed to claim it, and the resilience of those who had survived its trials. Every discovery added layers to his understanding, and with each revelation, the tension that had hovered over the ranch seemed to shift, replaced slowly by a sense of connection. Finally, as the lantern flickered low, Lenora led Elias back to the ladder. "It's time to come up," she said. "The sun is setting, and the land is ready to breathe again." Elias followed, climbing out of the darkness into the cool evening air. The sky was painted with gold and orange, clouds tinged with pink as the sun dipped behind the distant hills. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and freshly turned soil, and Elias could feel the ranch exhaling, as if satisfied that he had begun to understand its ways. He turned to Lenora, the first smile breaking across his face since he had arrived at the ranch. "I think I understand now," he said quietly. "Not everything, but enough. This place, it's alive. And so are you." Lenora's lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes softening. "And now it has you," she said. "That's all the ranch needs. Someone who listens, someone who respects it, someone who will stay." The days that followed were filled with labor and learning, but also a sense of accomplishment that Elias had never experienced. Together, he and Lenora repaired the house, cleared overgrown fields, and tended the garden she had maintained for so many years. Elias marveled at her knowledge of the land, how she could read the soil, predict the weather, and sense the smallest changes in the fields. He learned quickly, guided by her steady hand, and found himself growing not just as a rancher, but as someone attuned to the rhythms of the land. At night, they would sit by the fire in the main room, sharing stories of the past, their voices mingling with the crackle of burning wood. Lenora spoke of her childhood, the hardships she had faced, and the lessons the ranch had taught her. Elias told her of his own life, of the city he had left behind, and the yearning for something real, something enduring. Slowly, the walls between them, built of caution and solitude, began to crumble. One evening, as the stars spread across the sky like scattered diamonds, Elias and Lenora stood on the porch overlooking the fields. The air was still, the land bathed in silver moonlight. "I never expected this," Elias said, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and gratitude. "I thought I was coming here for $1, a challenge, but I found something far more important." Lenora's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. "Sometimes the land gives what you need most," she said softly. "If you're willing to listen, to work, to understand, it can give you more than you imagined." In the following weeks, Elias and Lenora uncovered more of the ranch's secrets. Hidden rooms revealed old tools and heirlooms, tunnels beneath the east field showed evidence of previous settlers, and the journals helped them reconstruct the lives of those who had come before. Each discovery strengthened their bond and deepened their connection to the land. They realized that the ranch wasn't just a place to live, it was a living memory, a keeper of stories, a teacher, and a protector. Word of their work slowly reached the nearby town, and people began to speak of the ranch differently. Where once it had been feared or dismissed, it now held a sense of respect. Neighbors brought small gifts, shared knowledge about crops and weather, and began to see Elias and Lenora not as outsiders, but as keepers of a legacy. The ranch had tested them, shaped them, and now allowed them to thrive. One morning, Elias woke before sunrise and stepped into the fields. The air was crisp, the grass damp with dew, and the world seemed hushed in reverence. He walked to the barn, examining the repairs they had made, and the animals now thriving in their care. The sense of peace settled over him, the kind that comes from knowing you have earned your place, from understanding a challenge and rising to meet it. Lenora joined him, carrying a basket of eggs from the chicken coop. She smiled at him, and for a moment, the weight of the past, the trials, and the secrets of the ranch seemed to lift. "We did it," she said simply. "We made it ours." Elias nodded, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. "Not just ours," he said, "the ranch's too. We listen, we respect it. It gives back in ways we never expected." As they walked back to the house, the The first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, gilding the fields and illuminating the work they had done. The ranch, once abandoned and forgotten, now thrived with life, history, and the promise of a future shaped by hands willing to understand it. And in that quiet golden morning, Elias and Lenora realized the truth. The ranch had never been about the dollar they had spent or the land itself. It had been about trust, patience, courage, and the ability to see beyond the obvious. It had been about connection to the land, to its history, and to each other. Together they stood on the porch, looking out over the fields, feeling the pulse of the ranch beneath their feet. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the lessons of the past and the promise of what was yet to come. They had faced the tests, uncovered the secrets, and emerged stronger, not just as keepers of the land, but as a part of its enduring story. Elias took a deep breath, the scent of earth and wildflowers filling his lungs. "We belong here," he said quietly. Lenora rested her hand on his arm, the faintest smile playing on her lips. "Yes," she agreed. "And now? The ranch belongs to us all, in every way that matters." The sun rose higher, painting the sky with light and warmth. The land stretched endlessly before them, alive with possibility, history, and memory. And for the first time since he had arrived, Elias felt the full weight and wonder of what he had found. He had bought a ranch for $1, yes, but he had discovered a life far richer than money could ever measure. A life of purpose, challenge, love, and belonging. And the ranch, which had waited silently for decades, finally seemed at peace.